Welcome everyone to episode 5 of the 5 Starr Wrestling Report, a wrestling show dedicated to bringing you my thoughts on all wrestling news, topics, and shows. If you are checking out this channel for the first time and you'd like to keep posted on FSWR content, make sure you hit that subscribe button, hit that little bell icon to keep yourselves in check with everything, and you won't be disappointed. Got a lot of stuff to go over today, so I'm just going to dive right into this report. And I'm going to start with my thoughts on the G1 Climax 29 finals, which concluded on August the 12th at the Nippon Budokan Arena in Tokyo. And we really had 3 big angles take place on that show, 3.5 if you count the stuff involving Katsuyori Shibata. We had the Kenta heel turn and the alignment with the Bullet Club. We had a tag match that saw Minoru Suzuki pinning the IWGP Heavyweight Champion Kazuchika Okada, thus earning himself a world title match at the upcoming Royal Quest show. And then we also had the G1 Climax finals themselves, featuring Kota Ibushi defeating Jay White. So let's break down the stuff involving Kenta. It's a 6-man tag. Kenta, Yoshihashi, and Tomohiro Ishii versus the Gorillas of Destiny and Bad Luck Fale. And going into this match, there was that little flicker in the back of my head that got me thinking, something doesn't seem right here. Because Kelly and Rocky announced earlier in the program, I think it was during one of the prelim tag matches, that Tama Tonga had sent out a tweet talking about a new recruitment to the Bullet Club. And they were going back and forth on commentary. Is it a young lion? Is it a new guy we've never seen before? Maybe someone from another company making a shocking debut? And I don't know. The whole Kenta return to New Japan was always strange to me. They bring him back at the Dominion show on June 9th with all this fanfare and all this hype. He gets what I thought at the time was a pretty welcoming babyface reaction. And over time, it seemed like people became more milquetoast with him. His matches never really clicked with a lot of people. He was working heel for a lot of his G1 matches without actually being a definitive heel character. The announcers started talking about brand loyalty and how a lot of people resent the fact that Kenta was basically a pro wrestling Noah guy for a large chunk of his career. And all of this seemed like they were submissively alluding to the idea of a Kenta heel turn without actually being so blatant about it. And the same goes for Kenta. Sure, he was working a more heel style during his matches, but there was never a moment where the Bullet Club would involve themselves in his matches or tease the idea that Kenta was looking to join the group at any time during the tournament. So they do the match. They strategically have Kenta not tag in for the whole match. Eventually, Ishii goes to make the tag, but Kenta drops down from the apron. He backtracks up the ramp. Ishii tries to make a comeback on his own on the Bullet Club, but Kenta runs in and takes out Ishii, hits him with the GTS, and then Tama Tonga gets the pin on Ishii. So Kenta grabs the mic afterwards. He's about to cut a promo, and that's when Katsuyori Shibata runs in, starts beating up the Bullet Club. He hits a drop kick on Kenta in the corner, sets him up for a penalty kick, but Jado lashes him with a kendo stick. Kenta gets the jump on Shibata, puts him in a sleeper hold, kills him with the penalty kick, and then he sits cross-legged on Shibata's chest as a blatant disrespect. And that was the big angle. So, a couple things to take away from this. First thing is that they use this to set up a program with Kenta and Ishii, which I will talk about later when I run down the cards for all the upcoming shows. Second, and probably the most notable thing that they did here, was tease an in-ring return for Katsuyori Shibata, which would be his first wrestling match since April 9th of 2017, when he wrestled Kazuchika Okada for the IWGP Heavyweight Title at the Sakura Genesis event. And obviously people are well aware of all that went down on that show. There's a spot during the match where Shibata went to give Okada a headbutt. He split himself open, and he ended up with a subdural hematoma, which is a severe bleeding of the brain. And he also ended up with paralysis on the right side of his body. And this is according to an article by Ryan Klingman over at CubeCircleWrestling.com. The hematoma had brought with it partial right side paralysis, right ear hearing loss, as well as right homonymous hemaniopsia, a loss in the right field of vision in both eyes. On May the 2nd, Shibata underwent a second surgery, this time to replace the parts of his skull that had been removed weeks earlier. In the ensuing months, Shibata would undergo cutting-edge electrotherapy, periodically updating fans with his Real Talk blog posts. By the way, if I completely butchered the pronunciation of that medical term, I apologize. So Dave Meltzer reported on the April 13th Wrestling Observer that, quote, "It was to be believed that Shibata would never be cleared to wrestle again." And here is what we know about the status of Shibata as per the Wrestling Observer from August 13th, 2019. This is from Ian Carey at C-Scoops. Regarding last night, Katsuyori Shibata has not been cleared to wrestle. It's a one-off thing, it's an angle, and I don't think there's much else to it. This is Dave Meltzer's quote. So that's all we know right now. Is it possible that we will see Kenta versus Shibata at some point down the road? It all depends on whether or not doctors clear him to wrestle or not. I'm very skeptical right now. As of 2017, Shibata has not been physically active whatsoever. Even in his own dojo that he runs. As far as the stats have told us, Shibata has not been physically active with his students, which shows just how serious they're taking this. And here's another thing, too, we have to keep in mind. We're talking about a very serious injury that Shibata sustained. This is not a dislocated shoulder or a sprained ankle we're talking about. This is bleeding of the brain. I mean, read the reports. They will tell you that everything he went through a couple years ago was near-death experience. And for the people clamoring to see Shibata get back in the ring to wrestle again, keep this in mind too. The Daniel Bryan saga was not that long ago. This guy was plagued with injury after injury after injury after injury for 2 straight years, to the point where he had to retire due to multiple head concussions. Remember the interview on ESPN where he talked about accumulating somewhere around 10 documented concussions in addition to all the undocumented ones? And that Bryan had stimulated a lesion on the temporal part of his brain that caused post-concussion seizures? This was only 3 years ago. It feels like a lifetime now, yes, but Daniel Bryan having to retire for a couple years due to multiple head and neck injuries was a real wake-up call to the wrestling business. And it's great to see Bryan was able to make a healthy and triumphant comeback, but it didn't go well for him the first time around. He got hurt in 2014, came back in 2015, got hurt immediately, and that was it until the spring of 2018. And I still worry about him every time I see him work a match. I'm afraid to see him get dropped on his head. I'm afraid to see him take a bad bump and re-injure himself. I think we feel this way about a lot of guys who are injury-prone. And right now, I'm just gravely concerned about the idea of a Katsuyori Shibata ring return. And I think a lot of you should be too. Especially when you consider the hard-hitting style of New Japan's wrestling versus the modern American WWE style. But like I said, right now, we don't know a whole lot about where this is all going. It could lead to a match. It could have just been a one-off angle like Dave said. And I think we should leave it at that until we receive further update. As far as the tag match to set up Okada's next title defense goes, more than anything, I think the build-up to this is the more noteworthy item. It's Zack Sabre Jr. and Minoru Suzuki versus Hiroshi Tanahashi and Kazuchika Okada. And in the finish to this match, Suzuki ends up getting the pin on Okada with the Gotch-style pile driver. And after the match, Suzuki cuts a promo on Okada, basically translating to something like, sucks to lose to a guy who wasn't even in the G1 this year. And that's really the compelling detail in this whole story. During the entirety of this tour, the announcers would subtly allude to the fact that Suzuki had remained pretty quiet about not being a part of this year's G1. And because Suzuki's a very off-the-cuff, crazy bad guy, it was really out of character to see him shield all this anger in the background for the entirety of the tour. So there was always that little seed planted that he was just waiting in the wings to snap and leap to the front of the line for a title shot. So they do the match. Suzuki kills Okada with a pile driver. He gets the win, and then he immediately demands a title match out of it. I thought this was really well set up. Do I expect Suzuki to win the world title at the upcoming Royal Quest show? No. But in terms of slow burn build to the storyline, I thought it was very well done. These are the kinds of things that Gedo does very well with his booking in New Japan. Subtlety. Building up logical angles that we don't see coming at the time, but when the payoff finally happens, we're like, oh yeah, I see how they got to that point. So there's a nature of predictability without spoiling the fun of it. As far as Kota Ibushi versus Jay White goes, this match was every bit of an establishment match for White as it was Ibushi. And any of you that have kept track of my G1 recaps know that I've been very critical of Jay White. I've maintained that Jay is a very good wrestler that lacks many elements of main event star credentials. And although he's had a great road to redemption story throughout the last month, the decision to have Jay win the B block was always risky to me. With that said, when I think about what Jay White represents to the New Japan wrestling fans, when you consider how Japanese fans treat wrestling as more of a sport than entertainment, I think I start to understand more of why New Japan is really pushing Jay White as a top heel for their company. I want to read a quick recap article of the G1 finals. This is from Neil David over at Voices of Wrestling. And this is important because I think it does a very effective job summing up what I'm trying to say here. The Western New Japan fan brings a certain type of social and cultural capital with them. They long abandoned the idea of wrestlers being corporate puppets or calling upon creatures of the night to aid them in convoluted battles against the abstract. They crave the nuance and wrestling skill that allows them to analyze small moments that combine into an epic picture. The reason why Jay White is so divisive is because he eschews that capital, and his wrestling speaks to a tradition that doesn't always comply with it. He speaks a language of ref bumps, low blows, and interference. So, when Jay White came to the ring with his entire Bullet Club contingency, I'm immediately put in a position where I expect to see wrestling I don't like. When I hear Grade 1 Climax, my mind goes to a place where I expect the highest caliber of professional wrestling. When I watch Jay White, I see all of the tropes that I associate with the exact opposite. So it's a very interesting story that they're setting up here. It's like we could have had Naito win the B block to set up a rematch with those two guys, whose story this year was basically, let's play a game of can you top this, where we try to kill each other by dropping us on our heads all the time. Or we could go with the ultimate heat magnet and have the hypothetical Antichrist of New Japan win the B block as a way to really rally the fans behind Ibushi that much more. Sure, we might not see as physical of a match as we might have seen with Ibushi versus Naito again, but the drama would be much higher with Ibushi versus White. So, when I put my feelings of White aside for a minute, this does make all the sense in the world. And when you think about the pre-match angle with Red Shoes kicking the Bullet Club away from ringside, and later Gedo when he tried to interfere, it was so great because Jay White was so sure of himself going into this match, only because he had the added benefit of his buddies to help him win. It's the way that he made this miraculous comeback in the G1 to begin with. So when Red Shoes gave the middle finger to the heels and sent them all to the back, White only had his God-given skill to get him through the rest of the match. And the problem was that he was facing a guy with a vendetta to get off his chest. And obviously we saw how this turned out in the match. White absolutely dominated Ibushi for a large portion here. He worked over Ibushi's ankle. They did a ref bump. Gato came back out and tried to restrain Ibushi so that White could smash his ankle with a chair. And after all of that, the only thing this did was add more fuel to the fire. They had that awesome slap exchange where Ibushi dropped White with one slap to the face. White kept trying to make a comeback, but Ibushi kept beating him down and beating him down. And when Ibushi finally beat White with the Kamigoye, despite the copious amounts of attempted interference from the heels, the fans ate it up that much more. This was a match that played to the emotions of all stereotypes of wrestling that Japanese fans hate, and to a lesser extent, disgruntled American wrestling fans. So suffice it to say, I did enjoy this a lot. And I guess I'd be remiss if I didn't share what I thought of the 2019 G1 as a whole. This was the first G1 that I watched from beginning to end. And I would say that overall, I enjoyed it. New Japan is always a great stark contrast to the American wrestling, and it's always fun to see how different companies tell different stories in their product. And the one thing that I've always appreciated about New Japan is their ability to tell logical, progressive stories over long stretches of time. And while everything wasn't a home run, everything at least made sense. I did a horrible job keeping up to date with all the shows, but I figured that I would fall behind with everything from the beginning. Probably going to take a different approach with the G1 next year. One thing I did learn this year, especially from listening to the guys at Wrestling Observer and reading other people's input on these shows, is that not every single match is necessary to watch. You know, aside from the undercard tag matches that don't serve much of a purpose other than hyping up the upcoming singles matches for the subsequent shows, there are definitely skippable matches in the tournament too. So I might do a little more fast-forwarding with the prelim and dud matches next year, just so I don't drive myself mad with having to watch 19 consecutive 3-hour G1 shows. Okay, moving right along here. I want to talk about AEW real quick. So as of August 13th, it has been confirmed that AEW has signed, drumroll, Orange Cassidy. And I've had a lot of trouble wrapping my brain around this. I've had a lot of trouble trying to come to one conclusion or another, as I probably imagine a lot of people are. To me, it is very peculiar. Orange Cassidy has always been a polarizing character. It's always been very 50-50 with him. You've either got fans that like the character and think it's great, and you've got people like Jim Cornette who mark him as one of those indie mud show wrestlers with guys like Joey Janela, Joey Ryan, Kenny Omega, and the Bucks. And I think, to put it bluntly, Orange Cassidy is always going to be one of those diverging split performers. You're going to have people that like him and think the character's awesome, and you're going to have the ones that think the character sucks and is a blatant exploitation of the business. And depending on what side of the fence you fall on, I don't think there's ever going to be much of opinion swaying. I'm kind of in a different boat. I think there are pros and cons to having a guy like Orange Cassidy on your roster. And I think, just so that I don't come across as biased toward one opinion, I'd like to share the ups and downs of what a guy like Orange Cassidy could do for AEW. As far as pros go, let me say this. The one thing that a guy like Orange Cassidy has going in his favor right now is his current character. It is a standout, unique character unlike anything we've seen in pro wrestling in a long time. Not since the days of Kevin Nash do we have something in wrestling where the gimmick is to be deliberately lazy and lethargic in the ring. And in a current art form where I think we can all agree wrestlers lack in the business today, that being distinct and unique personas that stand above what everyone else is doing, say what you want, but you cannot argue the fact Orange Cassidy is not like any other wrestler in the business today. Nobody wrestles like him. Nobody carries themselves like him. Nobody performs like him. Orange Cassidy is his own character. He has an identity that people latch on to. Now, whether that identity is good or not doesn't really matter for the sake of this argument. Orange Cassidy is unique. And for that matter, I'll even go one further. If you look at it without too much thought, what is the difference between a guy like Orange Cassidy and, say, The Fiend? Seriously, what's the difference? Aside from the obvious character qualities, how are Bray Wyatt and Orange Cassidy that much different? They're over-the-top, wacky personas with their own distinct qualities that make them unique and different than anyone else. And if you need any more proof of how popular Bray's current Fiend gimmick is, go back and watch people's reactions at SummerSlam. People raved about that debut. Why? Because it was original, unique, and awesome. Another thing that could favor Orange Cassidy in AEW is the potential for fun undercard comedy angles that differentiates from the standard wrestling that'll be happening on AEW programming. Again, keeping with the theme of being original and innovative, there's the possibility of AEW doing a lot of creative and goofy angles with Cassidy's character, be it in-ring angles, vignettes, video packages, what have you. And the great thing about shooting video angles is that for the people that hate the character and don't want to see him wrestle all the time, you can cover that up by having Cassidy do promos and vignettes without having him constantly in the ring. So you get the best of both worlds. Now, granted, all of this depends on how deep AEW plans to go with video angles and promo vignettes to build up storylines. Considering the high level of production value that they put into their Road to All Out YouTube series, I don't see why they wouldn't be able to put out some comedic angles with Orange Cassidy. Like I said, you still get him on TV, but for the people that don't want to see him work in the ring, they get their satisfaction as well. And here's something that came to mind while I was going about my normal day-to-day business. It just hit me like, I never thought about that before. AEW is looking to grow their product and become a major alternative to the WWE. AEW has that added benefit of expanding on the Orange Cassidy gimmick to make the character original to the AEW brand. Part of the added benefit of being a big promotion like WWE is that they can take guys who are moderate to big successes on the indie circuit, they can repackage them, and they can rebrand them as their own. See the successes of what they did with guys like Seth Rollins and Dean Ambrose and Roman Reigns. See the successes of guys like Daniel Bryan and CM Punk. And WWE isn't the only company in that conversation. Look at how successful TNA was at getting over EC3, a talent that WWE completely neglected when he worked for them the first go-around. Look at how successful TNA was at getting over Drew McIntyre, Bobby Lashley, and Rockstar Spud. And to a lesser extent, AJ Styles, Samoa Joe, etc., etc. As horrible as TNA was for years and years, even they had some diamonds in the rough. And while, yes, Orange Cassidy already has an established gimmick thanks to his work on the indie circuit, it doesn't mean that there isn't potential for growth with the character. AEW has that added advantage on the corporate ladder to market and brand Orange Cassidy as their own character. And that means that they can expand on this gimmick to try and make it better however they please. As far as cons go, one thing that immediately jumps out to me as a potential flaw to the Orange Cassidy character is that of overexposure. And I think a lot of this has to do with the simple fact that Orange Cassidy is a comedy character. And one of the dangers I've witnessed over the years of watching various promotions feature comedy talent is the problem of character overexposure. TNA really struggled with this when it came to Eric Young. It was always one goofball gimmick after another with him. One minute he was a dork who was afraid of his own pyro, then they dressed him up in a goofy superhero costume, then they saddled him with a concussion gimmick where the idea was he took so many head bumps that he became clinically impaired. They had him do stupid stuff during matches like doing collar and elbow tie-ups with the ref and taking his pants off. If I'm not mistaken, I think they gave him a women's title at one point. And this kind of stuff didn't just happen over 1 to 2 years. This stuff went on for close to 5 or 6. It was just way too much. The shtick wore off, the talent was overexposed, and even though Eric's a really talented performer and he did his best to make the most of those gimmicks, the fact is, it hurt his credibility. And I worried the same thing could potentially happen to a guy like Orange Cassidy. If they use him sparingly and feature him in a couple segments a month, I think it'll be fine. But there is that danger of character overload with him. And a gimmick like his can get old very quickly if they aren't careful. Another potential problem I see is the question of whether or not the character gets over with the casual audience. Part of the appeal of a character like Orange Cassidy is his attraction to the hardcore audience. And whether guys like Cody want to continue to live in their own bubble, that AEW's target audience is mainly the hardcore male-dominated demographic, okay, that's his prerogative to have that belief. But if AEW wants to succeed on television, they're going to have to understand the importance of the mainstream wrestling audience. And they're going to have to take into account their opinions too, because the hardcore audience is going to drive television ratings just as much as the casual audience is going to drive television ratings. And as much as the Orange Cassidy character appeals to the hardcore fan base, we're yet to see if this will translate over to a TV audience. And there's the potential that it doesn't. There might be people that don't get the gimmick. People might be ambivalent about it. Others might completely detest it and turn the show off in disgust. We really don't know right now. That being said, there is the possibility that this character does not work on television. And AEW is really going to have to keep an open mind about this. Crazy things have happened in the wrestling business. If you would have told me 9 or 10 years ago that Santino Marella would get over on WWE TV with a gimmick sock as a finisher, I would have laughed in your face. But that goes to show the talent level of a guy like Santino that he can make that work. So this is going to be trial and error for a while. And just to give you a quick side note on the matter, let me read you something from Deadspin. This is from an article written by David Bixenspan. The complicating factor here is that Cassidy's low-effort routine only works when it works. When it doesn't, it does have a kind of stilted sideshow feel. He was widely expected to be one of the breakout stars on the independent shows during WrestleMania weekend this year, but that really didn't happen. Far too many of his matches felt rote or like introductions of his basic routine for fans who had never seen him before. So even in a situation where Cassidy is wrestling in front of a more smart mark crowd, he still doesn't always generate complimentary feedback. In keeping in mind with the idea of the hardcore versus mainstream fan, I think this raises another potential issue that we need to talk about. Obviously, AEW wants to establish a marketing identity. Whether or not this is in more of a sports-driven product or an entertainment product or a permutation of both, we really don't know for sure right now. None of the research I've found indicates the marketing strategy for AEW, which could be a problem down the road, but that's a discussion for a later date. The point here is, if AEW wants to be an alternative to WWE, and they want to restrict themselves to running a more sports-driven TV product, then we have to be honest here. Is Orange Cassidy really the kind of guy you want representing your product? Doesn't his character seem very out of place for that? On the same show that you'd be trying to re-legitimize wrestling in the United States and bring a more realistic sports-oriented feel to the product, you're also signing a guy whose gimmick is that he's lazy and uninterested? I don't know. Seems a little counterproductive to me. Then again, AEW also has gimmicks like the Librarians and MJF and the Luchasaurus and Jungle Boy. And as great as some of those gimmicks are, they're wacky and cartoonish, just like Cassidy is. So if they're looking for a best of both worlds, I think Cassidy is a good balance between sports and entertainment, if that's the road they want to go down. The only other strong downside I can see to Orange Cassidy right now, simply put, limited shelf life. Dave talked about this on The Observer this past week, on Observer Radio. A guy like Orange Cassidy can be great in spurts, but a gimmick like that can get very old very quickly, especially if the character doesn't evolve over time. There are only so many ways that you can feature the indolent, couldn't care less attitude gimmick. It can get old really fast. And while I can put a lot of stock in the creative ability of the AEW administration, at the end of the day, people grow easily impatient. And if they aren't constantly finding new ways to feature a character like Orange Cassidy, I don't really see him lasting all that long. God forbid they try to make him a centerpiece for the company 5 to 10 years down the road. And at that point, it's like, why'd you even sign him? And, here's another thing. If that character ends up crashing and burning, how does a character like that bounce back? Especially if he's been exposed to the point of having to do away with the gimmick entirely. So that's kind of where I'm at with Orange Cassidy right now. Like I said before, the whole thing is going to be a matter of trial and error. We'll have to see where they go with it, how far they'll take it, whether or not it gets over. If it works, great. If not, I wouldn't be all that surprised, but, it's not like the dude would be completely futile at that point. And that's why I'm a bit advocate of AEW branding Cassidy as their own talent, instead of just latching on to what made him a success on the independents. And I'll conclude the discussion on Orange Cassidy deal by reading Cody's tweet regarding the matter. This is his response during a fan Q&A. The fan asks, how can AEW justify hiring Orange Cassidy when AEW was promoting that it would be a more serious sports-based promotion? Cody's response, easily. He's a great and fun pro wrestler. The show is 100% sports-based, but the competitors are vastly different in style and delivery. So, it's still very ambiguous as to what AEW's marketing campaign is. Cody claims sports-based, but their website doesn't indicate it. The shows haven't fully supported it. And he seems to be insinuating that AEW is attempting a mesh of styles, sports-driven with an added wrinkle of entertainment. Why he won't openly admit that clearly indicates that AEW is still struggling to distinguish an identity. But only time will tell. All right. Major topic change. We've covered New Japan, we've covered AEW, and now it's time to cover a major news bulletin that's really shaken things up in the wrestling media over the last week. And I'm talking about the announcement of NXT possibly moving to air on the USA Network this upcoming fall. There's a lot I can say regarding the matter, but first I think it's important to give some context. So as of a couple weeks ago, PW Insider had leaked a report that there were ongoing negotiations with WWE looking to bring NXT to TV. And the initial idea was to air NXT on Fox Sports 1 on Wednesday nights from the 8 o'clock to 10 p.m. time slot. All of this in an attempt to counter-program with AEW's Wednesday night show this upcoming fall on TNT. And as of the dates of August 16th and August 17th, things have rapidly shifted gears. From Mike Johnson over at PW Insider. There have been a lot of rumblings about WWE taking WWE NXT off of the WWE Network and placing it elsewhere, with Fox Sports 1 being the most speculated possibility. However, over the last 48 hours, PWInsider.com has been told that there's a pitch for the series to be moved to Wednesdays on the USA Network starting this October, with the idea NXT would be graduate into a 2-hour series from Full Sail University in Florida. The idea would be for the series to start in that form on October 2nd, which of course is the same date that All Elite Wrestling launches its own weekly series on TNT. So that was on the 16th. Fast forward 24 hours later, this is Mike's report from August 17th. In regard to the potential of WWE NXT moving to the USA Network, there are some within WWE who believe USA is a done deal, and it's just a matter of time before the deal is announced. One source pointed out that NXT has a planned taping at Full Sail University on Wednesday, September 11th, and that they could easily launch the show live at that taping, then tape on September 12th, which is another announced taping, before settling in for live tapings every week in early October. If so, they could effectively be in that Wednesday slot a few weeks before AEW launches. And the real funny thing about this whole ordeal, well, funny, I should say pretty damning is more accurate, but when you really look at the crux of the matter here, Fox truly believed that their station was going to be the WWE station. You know, outside of Raw airing on USA every Monday night, Fox executives were pretty much banking and putting stock in the idea that they were going to have SmackDown on Fridays and NXT on Wednesdays, and that they were going to be able to use it as a sort of cover-up for the way things went down with the UFC coming to ESPN earlier this year. Now, the entire conversation has flipped itself on its head. Now the conversation is no longer about WWE and FS1. Now it's about WWE airing NXT on USA, and how this impacts the upcoming Wednesday competition with AEW shows on TNT. So if you look at it from Fox's perspective, they really got the short end of the stick in this whole story. But, in defense of Vince, and because he is a clever and shrewd businessman, Vince is well aware of the fact that running shows on USA up against TNT is a much bigger deal than running FS1 against TNT. USA is a larger cable network in more homes across the country. USA already has an established wrestling audience. And considering the amount of WWE content on USA right now, in addition to Raw, the whole thing would feel like a case of don't fix what ain't broke. You know, you got the added advantage of the network establishment with USA, and considering the competition you're going up against in the fall, it only makes sense to go with what's already working, as opposed to having to campaign to a new station and new viewers when people are naturally more inclined to tune over to USA to see wrestling anyway. So now all of this begs the question: is WWE moving to the USA a good thing or a bad thing? And I honestly don't know if there's any one simple answer to that question. I think a lot of it depends on who you ask. I can't see how this is a good thing for the disgruntled main roster fans that watch NXT as an alternative to what Vince produces on the main shows. I mean, I think it's pretty safe to say that the cat is out of the bag on this one. NXT moving to the USA means, in no uncertain terms, that Vince is going to want to take full control of every aspect of that show going forward. So for the fans, such as myself, that enjoyed Hunter's long-term progressive story playing to the build-up to the NXT takeovers, those shows are dead in the water now. For the fans that have watched and appreciated the 1 hour length of NXT and appreciated the continual roster rotation of fresher faces, that's gone. For the fans that watch NXT because of the desensitization to main roster talent, sucks to be you. Because you can pretty much guarantee that Vince is going to splatter main roster guys all over this show now. Now that can lead to some potentially creative dream matches that we've yet to see on WWE programming, but keep in mind, there's a major difference between dream matches that WWE can create with main roster NXT guys and dream matches that we actually would want to see. You know, no offense, but Baron Corbin versus Adam Cole for the NXT title does not sound very enticing to me. There's also the issue of the fact that by moving NXT to USA and using it as a platform to counter-program with AEW, WWE is basically destroying the foundation of what NXT was built on, that being a developmental system. And if things work out to where NXT does move to USA and WWE decide to run it as more of a third major brand, in addition to Raw and SmackDown, NXT is no longer going to be trademarked as a developmental system. So that raises all sorts of questions. How does this affect your trainees? Are they going to get TV exposure along with whomever Vince brings over from Raw and SmackDown, along with the current NXT guys you have there? Or are they going to have to find a new method of exposing the greener guys and gals on camera? You know, part of what made the territorial days, and to a lesser extent old school WWF and WCW so great, is that If there was ever a new guy that you were trying to establish, or a new commodity that you signed and you were trying to feature him on television, a lot of the time, these companies would just throw guys out to the ring cold with little fanfare or hype. And it was a real case of sink or swim. Sometimes new guys made great impressions. Other times it was train wreck awesome to watch. The problem nowadays is that because of how formulaic WWE matches are and how particular they are with laying out and agenting their stuff, newer talent has a much tougher time getting that chance to go to the ring and make first impressions. And with the likely chance of NXT going to a heavily featured time slot, running head-to-head with another wrestling company on a different channel, you really think Vince wants to be spending TV time putting together enhancement matches or squash matches? I just don't think it's going to happen. Now, I will say this. One thing that I have not heard any major wrestling source talk about is what will happen with the NXT UK going forward. Same goes with shows like 205 Live. Are they going to be factored into this Wednesday night equation in any way? My bet would be no, considering Vince's lack of interest in the cruiserweights and how NXT UK is sort of a niche product in and of itself. But if you need another base to get current NXT guys on just to give them TV exposure, I think those are your best options right now. It's either that or you try to find ways to finagle them into what is already going to be a cluster pandemonium of a show in Raw, SmackDown, and NXT. Here's another thing we have to keep in the back of our minds too. The XFL relaunch, it's not that far off. And Vince might think that he'd be able to handle every aspect of the day-to-day operations in WWE, up to and including rewriting television the day of. But I just don't think it's going to be possible. XFL is going to take precedent over everything else. So I think that's something we have to bear in mind. And you know, for the fans out there craving to see some sort of rebirth of the Monday Night Wars, in this case we're talking Wednesday Night Wars with a new lesser established brand going up against a third-tier WWE brand, nevertheless, it is still a war of some sort. It's competition. And this could lead to some plenty of assertive booking from both brands to ensure that they're counter-programming at every turn to keep people's interest. It's also why I believe that WWE would quickly decide against doing taped shows, especially when you consider spoilers and how easily their shows would get leaked. So that's really where we are right now with this whole thing. You want my honest opinion? I was very distraught by the news that NXT was moving to the USA, or the idea that they were moving to the USA. It hasn't been fully announced yet. And I'm not distraught because I think it's a bad move or a horrible business decision or anything like that. Selfishly, I'm just bummed about what I know is going to happen. That NXT is going to be treated exactly like the main roster shows, which is why I boycotted watching Raw and SmackDown in 2019 to begin with, because I got fed up with watching those shows. That all of the guys who they've been building up in developmental over the next year are going to get sucked into a vortex with 150 other guys, that sucks. No one's going to get prominently spotlighted. Characters are not going to evolve. Wins and losses are going to go back to not mattering again. And the main roster guys are going to take priority over the developmental and newer guys, thus playing into a major thing I've been talking about in this news cycle, character overexposure. We'll hear more about this on Monday night. I will say this. This is the most intriguing wrestling news that I've been keeping up with in a long time. There are a lot of possibilities that could spawn from this. And whether we see it as good or bad, it's definitely newsworthy. Okay. Before we end this week's episode, I do want to take the time to run down some upcoming shows. These next couple weeks are going to be pretty big for wrestling. We've got the Super J Cup set to take place from August 22nd through the 25th. First round matches include Rocky Romero versus Soberano Jr., Clark Connors versus TJP, Karistico versus Bushi, Rizuki Taguchi versus Jonathan Gresham, Robbie Eagles versus El Phantasmo, Yo versus Dragon Lee, Sho versus Taiji Ishimori, and Will Ospreay versus Amazing Red. Should be a pretty fun tournament. Single elimination. Then we have the stuff going on Saturday, August 31st. 3 shows that upcoming weekend. Get ready. We've got the New Japan Royal Quest show. Ren Narita, Shota Umino, and Rizuki Taguchi versus Roppongi 3K. Juice Robinson and Kota Ibushi versus Hikuleo and Yujiro Takahashi. Robbie Eagles and Will Ospreay versus El Phantasmo and Taiji Ishimori. Sonata and Tetsuya Naito versus Chase Owens and Jay White. Gorillas of Destiny versus the winners of the Road to Royal Quest tournament. Tomohiro Ishii versus Kenta for the Never Openweight Championship. Zack Sabre Jr. versus Hiroshi Tanahashi for the British Heavyweight Championship. And Kazuchika Okada versus Minoru Suzuki for the IWGP Heavyweight Championship. We've got the AEW All Out show at the Sears Center Arena in Chicago, Illinois. Same date. We got Adam Page versus Chris Jericho for the inaugural AEW World Heavyweight Championship. Jon Moxley versus Kenny Omega. Trent and Chuck Taylor, the Best Friends, versus Evil Uno and Stu Grayson of the Dark Order. Winners receive a bye in the first round of the upcoming World Tag Title Tournament. Lucha Brothers versus the Young Bucks in a ladder match for the AAA World Tag Titles. Cody versus Shawn Spears. Darby Allin, Joey Janela, Jimmy Havoc, 3-way. Rio versus Hikaru Shida, and the 21-woman Casino Battle Royal, with the winner earning a spot in the inaugural AEW Women's Championship match. That particular match I'm looking forward to. And the third show taking place on that day is the NXT UK TakeOver Cardiff event. We got Toni Storm versus Kaylee Ray for the UK Women's Championship. Walter versus Tyler Bate for the UK Championship. Zach Gibson and Jason Drake versus Mark Andrews and Flash Morgan Webster versus Mark Coffey and Wolfgang, 3-way match for the UK tag titles. And Dave Master versus Joey Coffey, last man standing. Then we also have the MLW War Chamber event, which is set to take place on September 7th at the Nitec Sports Arena in North Richland Hills, Texas. We got Contra Unit versus Filthy Tom Lawler, Ross and Marshall Von Erich, and a 4th mystery partner to be announced. And this is all taking place inside the War Chamber. And other stuff for the card, I presume, will be announced on the upcoming TV show. Other than that, nothing else has been announced for it. And I have not been able to actually locate a full rundown of the card online, including on MLW's own website. So they either do not have anything announced other than the War Chamber match, or I'm just an idiot. So that's what we have all coming up. All kinds of mixtures of pro wrestling styles. So if you're a big fan of diverse wrestling styles, you're going to see a lot of it in the next couple weeks. And I think that about covers everything I wanted to go over. Thanks to all of you that tuned in to watch. If you would like to keep up to date with all future episodes of the 5 Starr Wrestling Report, make sure you hit that subscribe button and click on that notification bell. Also, give this video a like if you don't mind, and share some of your feedback down below about any or all of the topics discussed in this video. We have 2 uploads a week on this channel. We have the FSWR news topics, such as the video you saw today, and we also have the FSWR review series, where every Thursday/Friday, depending on when uploaded, I will be reviewing MLW, NXT, and eventually AEW's television shows. If you are interested in checking out these reviews, stay posted with the 5 Starr Wrestling Report channel every Thursday and Friday to keep updated on those. And with that all being said, have a great day, and I will talk to you all again later this week.